I'm going to start by talking about the philosopher Thomas Hobbes. So he's a very well-known philosopher from the 1600s. So he's dead. poor old Thomas Hobbes. But he had some ideas about human behavior in the absence of formal government. And he thought if humans didn't have formal government, that they would easily descend into social chaos, that we needed that to control our animalistic behaviors. And so he also based his principles on human governance and the fact that we needed government to control our animalistic behaviors. He didn't think that we were necessarily bad or evil, although he didn't think kindly about us. But he thought that if we didn't have government to control us, that we'd easily descend into social chaos when crisis happens. So this is easy to believe when we watch news, when we watch Hollywood movies, that the rock is inevitably in. And we see how our government responds to disasters and crisis. There's social chaos everywhere, right? Panic, looting, disaster, marauding, looters everywhere. That's what we see. So it seems easy to believe that Thomas Hobbes, back in the 1600s, without news media, was right? So I want to talk about the case of 9/11, and I'm going to take you on this journey, which is the theme of the talk, to interrogate whether or not this is true. So, 9/11, now, anybody who's not a toddler or a kid knows, and even some of them do, the drastic impacts this had on how it changed our society. So I remember watching, because I was only 5 years old at the time. You believe that, right? You're not laughing at me. That was not a laugh of doubt. You're like, yeah, she's totally 25 years old or however. Yeah, no. I remember watching the Twin Towers fall on television, like many of us did, being filled with fear. And that day, I saw men falling out of their windows, jumping to a death that they thought might be better than the one that awaited them above in their office. People emerging from clouds of dust like zombies, not wanting to eat your brains, but to escape what they thought was an inevitable existential threat. Their city was under attack. They also quickly realized that Manhattan is an island. And during 9/11, they shut down transportation to and from Manhattan. So what they did was they headed toward the water. Hundreds of thousands of them. And who waited for them were private commercial boaters. And they started taking them off the island of Manhattan to bring them to safety in New Jersey. Who would have thought that, right? New Jersey? And so the Coast Guard saw this happening. And they put out a call and they said, all available boaters in the area, if you can and are able and want to, please come help get these people off Manhattan. And they did, by the thousands. So the 9/11 boat lift resulted in over 500,000 people being evacuated off the island of Manhattan during 9/11 in 9 hours. Think about Dunkirk, right? All of you seen that movie? That took place over a period of a week, and 336,000 approximately were rescued. Where is our boat lift movie? And a bigger question is, why don't we hear about the boat lift in our narratives of 9/11? Instead, we hear about terror, chaos, panic, and disorder. So maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, that doesn't necessarily mean Thomas Hobbes is wrong, right? He was a wise philosopher in the 1600s. He knew everything about human behavior. Okay, I can accept that. And it could be that the people of New York were especially resilient, right? New York strong and all that. They didn't have that back then, but we can just apply it because that's applied to almost every disaster now. So let's look at different cases. So as you heard in the introduction, I studied Katrina and Hurricane Harvey. So in 2017, anybody from the Houston area remembers Hurricane Harvey. During Harvey, thousands of civilians were rescued by members of the public, what we came to know as the Cajun Navy. Funny, or fun fact, as the kids say these days, this also happened during Hurricane Katrina. And if you were alive watching the news in 2005 about Hurricane Katrina, you heard about looting, chaos, disorder, panic, crime, total destruction, and desperation. But you didn't hear about civilian rescues happening at all in the news. So part of the problem of the response to Katrina was the government, people in the government, like the Governor Kathleen Blanco, she authorized the National Guard to come engage in search and rescues, as is common in disaster situations. So that's fine. She got on the news purportedly, so this isn't verified. Like, we don't know if this actually happened, but it's said that she got on the news and said about the National Guard coming into New Orleans, that because of the reports of social chaos and looting, that the National Guard was authorized to shoot and kill American citizens based on media reports that were found to be untrue. It's actually a thing. It's called disaster mythology. So, again, was Hobbes right? These are just a couple of cases. We can't, in science, declare truth based on a couple of cases. What about The Lord of the Flies? Do you all know what The Lord of the Flies was? It's a book, right, by William Golding. He's a fictionist. So he wrote the story of a couple teenagers, I don't remember how many exactly, who got shipwrecked on an island. And in that, with a lack of government, with a lack of parents, it just went to shit. Murder, mayhem, destruction, pigs' heads on stakes, my God. Humans are terrible when they don't have authorities to tell them what to do and to control their basic human urges, which, as Hobbes said, were pretty crappy. A couple years ago, there's a historian, he's Dutch, named Rutger Bergman, and he went to the island of Tonga in the South Pacific, and he talked to five men. That's not terribly important, but whatever. 5 men. In 1965, these men were teenagers. And what they did, as teenagers do, when I was a teenager, I decided to steal a boat and go into the ocean in the middle of the night because that's a great idea. That's what these kids did. They stole a boat, went into the ocean in the middle of the night, and they got shipwrecked, right? Because they were a little bit dumb. It sounds like fun, though. They got shipwrecked for 15 months. They were stranded on that island. What happened? Did they kill each other? Go around in a debaucherous orgy of blood, like Hobbes would have you believe, without parents, without government? No. They created their own little happy society, and they sustained and lived for 15 months by themselves. That's fantastic. So William Golding was totally wrong in his fiction book, but he's a fictionist, okay? So he's a fictionist. He's allowed to do that. However, we've come to use the Lord of the Flies to represent this Hobbesian depiction of how human beings act in the absence of formal government. All right. So the thing about the Lord of the Flies, the real Lord of the Flies, is that these children, teenage boys, my God, who thinks they're capable of this? They maintained a civic society in which they grew and flourished. That's something for helicopter parents to consider, by the way. Just FYI. So again, a couple of cases. But what I'm trying to convey here, in pushing back against these examples, is that the popular American imagination is built on Hobbesian perspectives that originated in the 1600s about how we act in times of crisis. And this is not terribly problematic, but if you think about instances like Katrina, you see how it affects governance on the ground. Because our disaster management institutions, our government institutions, are based on these Hobbesian principles. Okay. There's also a problem that there's a wealth of science about human behavior in crisis situations, when things are disrupted, when the social order is disrupted. And this is in multiple disciplines like sociology, disaster studies, crowd sciences, history, anthropology. All right? There's case after case after case of what I'm talking about, where humans come together in the worst situations, they operate collectively, and they do not operate, for the most part, there's always exceptions, in their own self-interest, as Thomas Hobbes would have you believe. So the thing about Thomas Hobbes, like William Golding wrote fiction, Thomas Hobbes is a philosopher. The thing people don't realize about Thomas Hobbes is that his work on the natural state of humans, which is what he called it, or actually it was a debate going on in that time amongst multiple philosophers, was that he based his assumptions on human behavior on what he felt, how he felt humans would act without formal governance. Not on what he knew through empirical research. He was a philosopher. Not that philosophers are bad. Everybody loves Nietzsche, right? I do. But essentially, it is well known that the state of nature is a thought experiment. So a lot of what we come to understand about human behavior, at least from this perspective, at least from the institutional perspective, what we see on media, what we see depicted on Hollywood, is based on a thought experiment and not empirical evidence. But it's clear we have a problem with science in this country. I don't think I have to give you examples about that. But the fact is that our narratives perpetuate these false notions about human behavior. And they fail to recognize the fundamental human beauty we have within us, that we want to help others. And that's demonstrated in instances like the 9/11 boat lift. We want to help others. Again, the problem here is that there's that tension between empirical knowledge and how people base their opinions about what people do in life on what they see in the media, social media, and in Hollywood. Because I can't tell you how many times I've taught classes, given this talk in similar forms around the world, and people believe the same thing about disaster. Panic, looting, social chaos. Where did you get that information, I asked them. I saw it in the movies. The Rock came and saved everything, though. Totally fine. The Rock is there. So as much as we deny the fact that we don't believe in fiction as real, we actually do. And that isn't a problem in as much as that when we believe fiction, we engage in actions that make that fiction real on the ground. And that affects our policies and practices. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I've been waiting to say that.